So welcome. This is to celebrate Father's Day weekend. We thought it would be fun. My dad and I have always been really close, and so we thought it would be kind of neat to do something to share lessons learned and insights and all that kind of stuff. So I'm Rachel Druckenmiller. I know that I already know many of you, and I live in just outside of Baltimore. And I am a speaker and a trainer, and I focus on working with corporations and associations, helping to humanize the workplace and to build resilience and well-being so that people can thrive and be more connected at work and at home. So I love what I do. I've been doing lots of virtual trainings and workshops and facilitation, and have a pretty busy, next couple of months coming up. So I'm really grateful to be able to take, all of this work that was done in person and take it online. And so I'm really excited to introduce my dad, Michael Bryant, and I will let him kind of go ahead and tell you who he is.
Yes, hi, and I'm Michael Bryant. I'm Rachel's dad. I am a management consultant and an executive coach. I've had a business for 40 years. And I'm basically a professional unstucker. I'm the kind of person that people come to let their hair down and sort of figure out areas of their life where they need to move forward. And my real passion is driving negativity out of organizations and teaching people how to communicate and connect so that they can get things done. And when I'm not doing that, I'm an endurance athlete and a multiple Ironman finisher.
Yeah. How many times? Let's be clear on this.
Six.
Okay. Yeah,
and,
6 times.
And counting.
And
Yes.
counting. We were going to do number 7 this summer, but stinking coronavirus, right?
Yes, but that's okay. I'll be back. I'm going to be the baby this year at 70, but next year I'll be a toddler at 71. So
exactly.
all good.
So here's, and then of course we love our families. I'm married to my college sweetheart, Bill, who also influenced and inspired by my dad, is also an Ironman finisher in Lake Placid. And he's a school teacher, and we've got a great marriage, and a lot of it's been inspired by what we've learned from my parents. And then I know, of course, you have another shout out to your special person, Dad.
Yes, my wife of my commander in chief of 40 years this year, Nancy. So yes, also very, very blessed. So it's a wonderful family that we have.
Yeah. So here's how it's going to go today, guys. We just wanted to kind of have like a kind of an informal conversation of just talking about some lessons learned. So this is inspired by a letter that my dad wrote to us. It was a letter to my children. Was it last year you wrote this, Dad, or 2 years?
Oh, it's been a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's a LinkedIn article that I did.
Yeah. So, and we'll share that afterwards. And then I had written an article probably 5 years ago called The Entrepreneur's Daughter, Lessons Learned, because we're both entrepreneurs. And so, the cool thing, I never saw my parents hate work growing up. So I was under this assumption going into the workforce that work should be something that we enjoy, that brings us life. Imagine the shock you receive when you enter the workforce at 21 and realize that a lot of people are kind of miserable at their jobs. So that motivates, I think, both of us to do what we do, is because we know what it's like to really love what we do and to thrive in our relationships and in our bodies. And so we want to help other people do that.
Yeah, our entire family is unemployable. None of us can actually hold a job. We all work for ourselves, and I started it, so
it's all your fault.
The credit or the blame, whatever you want to put it.
It's all your fault. So we're gonna do. What's that, Dad?
Good place to start always. It's my fault.
It is your fault, but I'm grateful for that. So we're gonna kind of go through a conversation. We're gonna go through a series of like these kind of statements in this letter that was written to us. And we're just going to go back and forth and have a conversation. If you have a question, feel free to drop it in the question. There's a Q&A box there. So if you're like, I have a question I really want to ask you guys, I'll be kind of checking that throughout and hope to, get to those at the end. And if we have to hang on a couple minutes later to answer those questions, we'll do that and include them in the recording if you have to hop off. But Dad, let's start with the first question. So the first thing, the statement, I guess, I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, no matter how hard you try, your best will always be good enough for somebody and not good enough for somebody else. Tell us about that.
So one of the reasons that I shared that is I think that this is a problem that we can all run into, and it's both an internal and an external problem. And this is how I look at it. Because people have needs, and needs are satisfied in different ways. I think it can be very frustrating and can really cause a person to feel inadequate if you're constantly trying to be enough. Because the reality is all you can do is the best you can do. And frankly, sometimes your best is just not what somebody needed. And you have one of two options. One is to feel really bad inside. I'm not enough. And it can just run the gamut. I don't spend enough time with these people. I don't read enough. I don't exercise enough. I don't sleep enough. I mean, you can just go on and on and on and on and on. And what it becomes is a form of self-criticism. And criticism as a motivational tool just simply doesn't work very well. So, I mean, what do you think about that, Rachel?
As somebody who has struggled with enough, which we know, my dad's I call him my Yoda and my first therapist for sure. Cause it took me probably like 30 years before I actually saw a therapist. But, I think a lot of it is that, it's easy for us to kind of get stuck in that place of overly focusing on what we're not doing and not focusing on what we are doing.
Right.
And so if we're constantly looking at all the ways we're not measuring up, we're going to get discouraged. And so part of it is accepting where you are. So a lot of because I've connected on LinkedIn, that I had a fracture. I was hit by a car on May 3rd and I landed on my back, and I have a T12 compression fracture on my spine. And so I have a back brace that gets hidden by my hair. And to be honest with you, some days, like since that happened, there have been days where I've had about 20% in the tank, and my best on that day, the best I could give was 20% of myself. And I had to learn to accept that on those days, maybe I took a 2-hour nap and did 2 hours of work, and I watched 4 hours of Parks and Recreation. Like that, right. That might've been my best on that day. And other days I felt like, man, I'm at like 110%. I've got so much to pour out and so much to give. And that is like more than enough on some days. And I think it's just important to recognize that like sometimes your 110% might not be enough for somebody, but that doesn't mean that you didn't try. It doesn't mean that you're not worthwhile. It doesn't mean that you're not valuable. It doesn't mean that you don't have something to contribute. It could be somebody else's, stuff that's preventing them from really seeing the value that you have, but it doesn't diminish your value.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that what you're dealing with all the time is just somebody's need. It's just a need. Somebody doesn't have a need to upset you. They don't have a need to overwhelm you. They just have a need. And you may or you may not be able to do that. Now, having said that, I kind of set the goal is that my goal isn't to be enough. My goal is actually just to be the best person I can be. And sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not. Now, that doesn't mean that there are times where that I need to get my act together or do better, improve what I did, or if I make a mistake, I need to make it right. But it does mean, generally speaking, if I go in and I say, listen, my goal is going to be to do the best I can do, and that's going to be good enough or it's not. But as you said, Rachel, you wake up each day and you don't know what the day is going to be like, and sometimes your best is like killing it. And other times your best is like not so much, but like that was the best you had for that day. So, the good news is if you wake up and your feet hit the ground tomorrow, you get another turn.
Yeah.
I think that's what's really most important.
Yeah, I think just closing out that point with one thing I think I've heard you say to me before is like, some will, some won't. So what? Like, don't.
Right.
Like, okay.
I think, great way. So another one that I'd like to get your thoughts on, Rachel, that I was talking about was never let what other people think of you become more important than what you think of yourself.
Yeah. So this can be hard, right? Can it be hard? We notice that like when someone says something to us or about us, or we're like, well, what do they think? Or what do you think? And I think it often comes out as a result of an insecurity in ourselves, is we're not secure in who we are. We're not secure in the value that we bring, and we can easily let other people define what we can and can't do. And we can kind of get held up by that. And so, one of the things I know I've learned from you, Dad, is like to really focus on getting clear on whose opinions matter. Like, because, we've heard opinions are like a-holes, everyone has one, right? And so, when we think about it, I'm just trying to keep this.
I use navels. I think they're like navels. I go to the other side of the body.
Well, whatever. Anyway, but it's true because it's so easy to get caught up in that. And I think like growing up in school, one of the things I'm really grateful for was I had a really strong sense of principle. And there's this quote that I loved from, it's like a Thomas Jefferson quote. It's like, I think it's, in matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so I always, growing up as a kid, if everybody was doing something, like everyone's trying to smoke, or everyone's trying to, do whatever, these behaviors, I wouldn't do those things. And sometimes it meant that I didn't fit in. Like when we don't conform to what other people's expectations of us are, sometimes that means that we have to experience the pain of not fitting in or not feeling like we belong to that. But then the question is, do I really even want to belong to that group?
Yeah, it's really a matter of sort of balance. It's to say, if somebody said to me, I don't care what anybody thinks of me, I'd ask them one or two questions. Will you be telling any more lies today? Is that the only one for today? Or, well, I think I've discovered that you're a sociopath. I actually don't work with sociopaths. So, I'll be taking the next bus that stops here. So it's not that we don't care. And there are certain people in my life that what they think of me matters enormously, but it's not a big club. So at the end of the day, it's sort of like, well, people are going to have their opinions, they're going to have their thoughts, but I have to hang around in my own head all day. And I have to basically make sure that my actions are sort of aligned with what I say my values are, to your point. And it's kind of like, and that's what's really most important, because at the end of the day, and also, when you're in a role of like a parent, or like a leader of an organization, like people are watching, particularly with children. Children pay virtually no attention to what you say. They're watching like a hawk what you do. And if your actions and your words don't align, they're going to follow your actions. Mm-hmm. So, that's what really begins to matter. It's not so much what people think, it's the behavior that they're demonstrating.
Well, even too, like on social media now, I've had this happen where it's like the bigger your platform gets, that it's so much easier to fall under attack. And so I know there have been moments where I've posted something and someone has said something and I've been like, oh my gosh. And then I'll be like, wait, I literally don't even know that person. Like, why do I care what that person thinks when I literally don't know them? I'm probably never going to meet them. Like, they're just airing their grievances and trying to use that as they're like bullying people. There's people out there that are like trolling, and it's like, why am I going to let that person, when I have plenty of other people in my life that love and care about me, who actually know me? It's like, the question we should ask ourselves is like, how well does this person actually know me at my core? And if they don't really know me at my core, why am I going to give them that power to let me decide? I think one of the questions, like, Dad, the conversations we would have was like, if someone at work, for instance, was doing something that really bothered me or upset me or made me feel badly about myself, it's like, why are you gonna give that person the power to determine whether or not you have a good day or a bad day? Like, don't give that person the power to let you have a bad day. You have the decision about how you're going to respond to them, even if you don't like what they did.
It's a bad trait. To your point, if you're having a perfectly good day and somebody's having either a bad day or sometimes a bad life, and they come into your space, like, why would you let them take your day? It's like, they are going to get the life that goes with it. The other thing is really important too, is that when you're dealing with somebody that's difficult, I've often said to someone, when somebody's being a jerk, there's something much worse than dealing with a jerk, and that's actually being the jerk. Because after they leave your airspace, they have to hang around with the jerk now. They have to go home with the jerk. You're like done with them. So It's really being able to look and saying, like, what really matters? What's really important?
Yeah. Exactly. No, I agree with that. And the other thing I just want to say one last thing is, like, sometimes we can let things stick to us, like something that someone said a really long time ago, and we can internalize these things. And like, for me, it was like that I don't belong, right? We all have some version of I don't belong, right? So each of us has something which goes back to I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I can't, whatever. And it's all, these two things are connected for sure. And so I look back at that, and for so much of my life, I carried this belief that I don't belong, or I'm not wanted, or I don't fit in. And because of that, I would be really reactive whenever I would experience even a glimpse of that. And then I would make up some story in my head about, like, see, those people don't want me to be a part of their group. And I never actually took the time to, like, ask to be included or to get curious about what was going on. And I let that internalized belief cause me to be reactive. And I've since questioned that belief. And so I think one thing that's important to ask ourselves is when we believe somebody else's opinion of us, ask, like, is that even true? Like, we don't even take the time to, like, call it into question. Like, is that even actually true of me? Just because someone says it doesn't make it true, Just because you think it doesn't make it true,
Yeah,
so I think that.
everybody's entitled to their opinion. They're not entitled to make their opinion your opinion.
Mhm.
That's how their opinion. I mean, it's just what they think. It's okay.
Right. Agreed. So, all right, look, this is a fun one because both of us do this very well. We're all making it up as we go along.
Yeah. So, all right. First of all, I would think, for those parents out there, this will resonate. If if there was ever a humbling experience, it's like, so if you think about this, it's probably the most important job in the world for which you need to have no qualifications. All you have to do is just have one. And so they show up and you have no idea what you're doing. You're kind of looking at probably your own past and saying, well, I will do this, but I'll never do that, because what happens is we're always affected by our past. We either replicate or react against our past, but we're always in some way affected by it. And so, I think probably the first indication that we're all making it up is I think being a parent is. And the thing about parenting that really makes it more challenging is, so you get kind of the protocol and the rule book for like this one, and then the next one comes, well, that rule book has nothing to do. Now I got to make it up all over again. And I can remember, I was thinking about this earlier, Rachel. At one point, I can't remember which one of you it was. It might have been Jane, but I don't know which one, your little sister. And we were talking about something, and one of you said, do you guys actually know what you're doing? And I'm like, oh, wow. It's like, no, we don't. We're just no. I didn't know it was that obvious. But but here's the thing why I think this is really important. Adults oftentimes try to walk around like they have their act together. And what they spend a lot of time, wasted time on, is wondering whether anybody sees that they don't know what they're doing. But you don't have to worry about that, because they're too busy wondering if somebody else knows that they know what they're doing. So leaders do it all the time. Leaders can be like a hot mess with this thing. It's kind of like, well, I don't really understand this. And I'm like, well, it's okay sometimes to say, like, I don't know what to do, because they know you don't, because you're acting like somebody doesn't know what to do. So it's okay, because we're all in the same boat that way. We're all making up. And if you make it up like real good, you can actually like fake it, that it actually looks like you know what you're doing. Like one of the professional areas that I work in a lot is with law firms. All it really means is that I look like you can know about as much as you can know about the legal industry and not be a lawyer. But I'm not a lawyer, but I just kind of know their shorthand and stuff. So it kind of looks like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just kind of making it up.
Kind of make it up, right? Like, I think that there's always this fear of like, well, what if I screw it up, or what if I do it wrong? And so then we don't ever take a risk. I mean, I think about, growing up, when I was in, maybe a sophomore in high school, I went to an all-girls high school, and we had this summer reading program that was an absolute nightmare. We had to read like 3,000 pages of these books every summer that like no 15 or 14-year-old has any interest in reading. And it made everyone hate reading. And then so everyone would read the Cliff Notes like the last month of summer just to be able to pass the test and then start the school year. And I thought that was stupid. And so, because I really like to read and it was making me hate reading. And so I was like, well, why don't I just has anyone ever asked if it could be done differently? And no one ever did. So I was like, well, I'm going to write a proposal to the heads of the English and history departments. I'm going to go sit down with them and see if they will listen to my proposal about what I think we should do differently at 15. And so I sit down across from both of them. I don't know what the heck I was doing. I'd never met with the heads of departments before, but I was like, this needs to change. And everyone's complaining about how much they hate it, but no one's doing anything. And so I sat down across from them and I typed up a proposal and I gave it to them what I thought we should change. And they changed the program. They dropped off some of the books from the list. They changed the structure of how they assessed us. They gave us like a study guide to take over the summer so that we had an expectation of what we were going to be quizzed on at the end of at the start of the school year. And so for me, that was like my first example of realizing like, I just made that up. Like, so that was a good idea. And because everyone else seemed to want it too, but they weren't doing anything about it. So, well, let me just try to do something about it. And I've kind of taken that with me into what I do in workplaces and organizations too. It's like, who cares if we've never done it before? Why don't we try it? Like,
and to your point, as you were saying that, I thought of an example in my own life. So we have this house up in Lake Placid, and so we wanted to become part of the community. I had done shorter distance triathlons, had sort of stopped in my 40s, had become a long distance runner, and we decided to volunteer for Ironman. I'm not doing Ironman because Ironman is just absolutely ridiculous. Nobody's going to do Ironman, and by that time I'm in my 50s anyway. But one of the things you do when you volunteer is you go into the last 2 hours and watch the finishers. And this is mind-boggling. These are like people you see walking down Main Street. These do not look like your prototypical athlete. And then here's Mike Riley's out there giving them the magic words, "You are an Ironman." And I remember looking at that and saying, you know what? Like, I don't like to watch, like I don't like parades, I don't like to watch. I'm like, I'm doing this. I am doing this. Having no idea what I was doing. And what I did is at the age of 55, I set a goal that at 56, in the next year, I would do an Olympic distance triathlon, a half Ironman, and an Ironman, all within the space of about 10 weeks. And I had a professional pro triathlete that's coaching me. And when I finished my first Ironman, I said to her, "What made you think I could do this?" She said, "I had no idea if you could do this, but you had a plan and you thought you were going to do it. Who was I to say what you could or couldn't do?" So sometimes, like, not knowing what we're doing can lead to these amazing outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. It totally can. And just to clarify too, for those who don't know, an Ironman is a 140.6 distance race. It start 2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and then a 26.2-mile run, a marathon. Yeah. So
Yeah.
just to clarify, that's what that is. It's
a marathon, the cool down, as we call it. That's the cool down. So I want to move on to another one. That's okay, Rachel. So
can I touch on that real quick though? Just real quick on that making up as we go along. For anybody who's like looking to make a move in your work that you're feeling like hesitant about, I look back at when last September, or actually a year ago, May really, when I told my company that I was leaving to go out on my own. Because I have two parents as entrepreneurs. So I'd seen the model of like, you can basically, what I tell people what I do, I said, I saw my parents like basically teach me that you can make up what you do and find people to pay you for it. Like, that's what I feel like I do. Make up what you do something valuable that contributes, and then people will pay you. That's sort of how I simplify what I do. And so, when I was launching my business, people were like, well, like, what's your plan? What's your like 1-year business plan and 3-year business plan and 5-year business plan? I was like, I have no idea. Like, I've never done this before, but I know that I'm a good speaker. I know that I can be compelling in the work that I do. And I know that I have impact. And I know I have a lot of connections and people that care about me and value what I do. And so I'm just going to trust that that's going to be enough. And I have a plan for the date I'm going to start. And the first day of my business, I decided I was going to have a photo shoot for my website, because I was like, well, what do I feel like doing today now that I get to call all the shots? And that was really fun. Like, I was like, what do I feel like doing? And so I'm just making it up. Like, people are always they assume that somebody who has taken a risk has planned out everything, and it's risky to leave a steady corporate job, but it's, for me, even riskier to go against what my soul wants to do, which is what I feel like I was doing if I was going to stay. I felt like I was going to be violating my own integrity and my own desire and belief to take that next step with my work.
Yeah, most of you listening have a plan about what you think is going to happen today. I'd like you to check that at the end of the day and see how much that matches. Before this whole thing hit, if that ever resonated, if you want to give God a good laugh, tell him your plan. It's kind of like, oh yeah, like, nobody said, yeah, I think I'll do like a pandemic, like in the next 12 months. It's like, no, what happens is your ability to adapt and adjust is what's going to keep you really effective.
Well, yeah, even with this, what just happened, right? Of like, okay, who plans it? Oh, I'm going to start my business, and 7 months later, there's going to be a global shutdown. And oh, by the way, all of what you do, which is in-person speaking engagements, that's all going to disappear for about 6 months. Figure it out. And yeah. So I decided, I had a client reach out and it was like in March, and they were like, do you do virtual training? And I was like, I mean, I've done webinars for like 10 years. I'm like, yeah, I sure do virtual shit. Let's have a conversation. And I just basically took what I was doing live and found ways to convert it and still make it engaging and learn new ways of using technology to make things engaging. And so within 2 weeks, I was like, yep, 100% virtual training. And that's what I've done. And it's been awesome. And some of you that are on the call now are connected because of those things. And then I got hit by a car, and then I was like, well, this was not part of the plan either. So how am I going to use this? And so I think part of it is like, how do we take each of those things that could have been a roadblock and then say, how do I use this, or what can I learn from this?
It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you that's gonna always make the difference.
Right.
So another one, Rachel, I'd like to get your thoughts on is, and this kind of dovetails into part of what we've been talking about. Be careful believing you know what other people are thinking or intending. If you really want to know, ask.
Yeah, this happens all the time in like pretty much any relationship is up for grabs when it comes to this question. I think like, we make up stories all the time about why people do what they do. We're like, well, this person did this like just to tick me off. I know it. And it's like, but do you? Like, do you really? Did they tell you that? Well, no, I just know they're just such an antagonistic person and they're just out to get me. And it's like, well, okay, but maybe they've got something going on that you have no idea about. Like, for instance, I was asked several years ago to interview the CEO of one of our clients to write a letter in their front of their open enrollment guide for the start of their benefits plan year. And so the HR team handed this guy off to me, their CEO, and they were like, good luck getting anything out of this guy. And I was like, okay, well, I appreciate the challenge. They said he was kind of like rough around the edges. And so I get on the call, start asking him some questions. And then we're talking maybe 15, 20 minutes. And he was like, these are some weird questions. And I asked him about his backstory, which is something we often don't do. Like, we very rarely get curious enough to understand someone's backstory. We just make assumptions about them based on their behaviors. And so I learned that he had uprooted himself from the Midwest to take a job on the East Coast. And when he did that, he left like everybody he knew. He left family, he left friends, he left community, he left teams he was coaching. And so I asked him, which is one of the questions, one of my favorite questions I've learned from you, which I would encourage everyone watching right now to write down. If it were just right, what would it look like? And I asked him that. I said, if it were just right, what would it look like? And he paused and he said, totally surprised me. Because again, the way this guy was presented to me was just like really standoffish and tough. And he said, in a perfect world, I would have personal friendships in Maryland. And then I had this moment, again, going back to my history of not feeling like I belonged or fit in. I immediately had empathy for him because I was like, he's not a jerk for the sake of being a jerk. He's lonely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think, and like, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think I love what you were saying earlier. It's like, when people start saying what they say to you, to me, well, you know how they are. And I'll say, well, how do you know? And they'll say, and I'll say, and they'll say, I'm saying, do you have like a knowing? Is this a giftedness? Is this because if you are in fact telepathic, you can go out and make a lot of money reading minds, and you don't need to be talking to me anymore. But if you don't know, you'll have to go in the sort of the longer line, and you'll have to ask. Well, what would I ask? Well, what would you like to know? Well, I want to know why they did that. Well, I don't know. Like, why don't you ask, like, why did you do that? Because that's what or I don't understand that. And so many times what I find is that, I love your concept of getting to know the soul behind the role. Who is that human being? And I can remember dealing with a manager sort of like yours. I mean, there's no endless, I can do this forever. I mean, there's no endless number of people that, I'm going to do like, adult daycare for the rest of my life, because there's numbers of people that can't play nice in the sandbox. And I can remember the same kind of thing. It was like, you cannot talk to this person. If you try to talk to them, they are dismissive, they are patronizing, they will say that it never happened. And so now I'm not at the scene of the crime. So I just see the bodies. I don't really know who did what to who. I do know this, that particularly in my role, I'll go into an organization, and what each person wants to do is to set me straight. So here, we don't know what else you're going to hear, but this is who they really are. And this is really why they do what they do. What they don't know is they're all telling me different things, and I'm just getting information. But one of the questions I like to ask, in addition to if it was just right, which I got from my mentor, Harville Hendricks. One of the things that I like to do is hang around people that are so smart they make my head hurt. Harville Hendricks and his wife, Helen Kelly Hunt, wrote one of the seminal books on relationships. Right there it is. Getting the love you want. Right. And so Harville's somebody that is a real source of inspiration for me, and somebody I go to a lot when I have questions. And this question, if it was just right, I love that question. But another question, this was the question I was asking this manager. So he starts talking about how people aren't doing what they're supposed to do. When people show up, they're supposed to have the answer. And I just listened to him. And then after a while, I said, "So, what was it like growing up in your house? Tell me about that." And he said, "Oh, it was great." And I said, "Well, tell me how conflict was handled in your house." "Oh no, no. What my father said went. If he said jump, you said how high." And I said, "Okay, now I've got the model. This guy was taught a rigid structure of communicating and just doesn't know what else." And I said to him, "So is what you're doing working?" And he said, "No, because these people are idiots. They don't respond." And I said, "Okay, so, but would you like people to respond more?" I said, "Okay, so would you be open to another way?" And he said, "Yeah." So we were able to get to the point where he was really able to understand more of the impact that he was having on other people, and not just the impact they were having on him. So just being able to get out of that, I know what they're thinking and I know what they're doing. And also, by the way, in the absence of not knowing, and I'll never be smart enough to figure this out, we almost always make up something bad. And they must be trying not to hear you. Why not? They might be trying to help me. Well, that's not fun. I mean, that's not, can't
Right.
gossip about that. I mean, who wants to do that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a goes along with that, in the absence of information, we just we make up stories because our mind wants to connect the dots. So if we have a story and we have 70% of the story, our brain doesn't want to take the time to figure out what really happened. Our brain is like, shortcut. I need to know what happened immediately. So let me make it up. And so one of the things that there's another book, if you guys haven't already read this, I think one of the best books on leadership is Dare to Lead. My dad and I both love reading, by Brené Brown. And one of the things she talks about in there is how when we get emotionally triggered, by and start making assumptions about people. And so a couple prompts that she encourages people to use are the story I'm telling myself is, or the story I make up is, or I make up that. And so just to get connected, what's the story you're telling yourself? Because we rarely take the time to pause and to ask, I had this with my conversation with my husband the other day, because he's a teacher and we're ending the school year, and normally he does something during the summer, like a summer camp or construction or something like that. And so I was in my head, well, what's he going to do this summer? And, making up all these stories about things. And so I told him, I said, well, here's the story that I'm making up. Instead of what happens often is we get accusatory, right? We come at the person you don't ever, or why don't you? And we don't take the time to pause and recognize that may not actually be happening. That's just a story you're telling yourself about what happened. So part of it is own your version of the story before you start throwing diatribes at people.
And when you do that, by the way, what happens neurologically is your brain temporarily cannot differentiate between something you vividly imagine and something that's actually happening, and you actually begin to believe it's real. And then you begin to act on what you think is a real belief, which is just, I refer to them as hallucinations, is what I say. I just say to somebody, so when you hallucinate about that, what do you tell yourself? Because it's closer to a hallucination than anything else. I just kind of made that up. Why? Well, because there's nothing good on TV, so I just thought I would sit there and, torture myself, or,
Sure.
or I'm going to call this person, I know what they're going to say. No, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you don't, because no, you don't, because why? Well, because it didn't happen yet. That's why you don't know. So better to have the experience,
Well, because you don't live in their head. I mean, that's the thing. It's nobody. I mean, this happens all the time in relationships too, right? I mean, I know we've both done work, and Bill and I, and then you and Mom. I mean, we really learned and got inspired by you guys. But looking through and saying so often in a marriage or a romantic relationship, where we get mad when the other person can't read our mind, when half the time we don't even know what we're thinking, and so it's get curious, or better yet, why don't you just tell them what you need? And spoiler alert, we're so afraid of being well, if I tell them what I need, well, that defeats the purpose, because they should be able to read my mind and know why.
Right. Because otherwise it's going to happen is you're going to get angry, and angry is what's called a secondary emotion. Anger is going to be almost always about either fear, hurt, or frustration. So if you can get underneath that and say, well, what is actually going on? Well, I'm frustrated. Well, that'll land a lot easier, because you're talking about yourself. And people can have much more empathy if you can just tell them about what's going on with you, rather than what they did or didn't do that might have triggered something. You'll get You know, it's important to be able to say to somebody, so this is what I need. Because at the end of the day, you know, behind every kind of frustration, there's going to be some kind of a need or a wish or a desire. If you can get to that, one of the things that we like to do is to be able, and I like to teach people is, don't go into a conversation when you're frustrated without also being equipped with what it is you want.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my frustration. This is my wish. This is what I would like, because what that does is it gives the sender more responsibility about what you have to say rather than, hey, I just need to dump on you. I need to throw up on you. Oh, I feel so much better. I'm sure you do. Now I have like puke on me that I have to clean off, but and I probably don't want to hang around you. Happens in organizations, happens in relationships.
Well, and I think too, like giving people, if someone does have that experience of like, here's what I'm frustrated about and don't like, okay, let them have their moment, right? Like they have to get that out of them and then say, okay, it's like a reframe. Like, how do we reframe that as an ask? So instead of saying, I don't like this, I don't want this, I don't like that. Okay, well, what do you want? Like, if it were just right, what would it look like? Which again, most people don't take the time to pause and ask that question. It's using a process of like appreciative inquiry of saying, okay, what could be the best possible outcome? What could be the best, potential, quality from this person that's trying to emerge? Like, instead of saying what's broken, what's not working, what do we need to fix, what's wrong? Those questions help us then focus more on our energy on what's wrong. And it's much harder, nearly impossible for us to really optimize that relationship and behavior.
And then when we're in that state, we're more than likely going to use one of the four I call them nonsense words: everybody, nobody, always, and never. If those words come out of another human being's mouth, meaningful communication has temporarily ceased. You never listen to me, not once in the history of my life, even by accident, like never, like, oh, forever. No. And everybody knows it. Oh, because you pulled the 7.8 billion people on the planet, and you know that. And so those when you're in that state, it's like you just need to go sit down a minute, because you're not in a place to talk to another human right now. You just need to like chill out and calm down.
Yeah, I agree.
What's going to come out of your mouth is not going to be good.
No, it's not. Well, also the thing that happens, so glad you mentioned that, and then I have a question from the audience I want to make sure I bring up that Jennifer asked. So one thing is when we are operating out of a heightened state of emotion, fear, anxiety, frustration, our prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's responsible for higher level thinking, problem solving, creative solutions, innovation, literally shuts down, and you're only operating out of your amygdala, the reactive part of your brain. And so if you're operating out of your amygdala, that reactive part, you literally cannot access higher level thought. And so you will not be able to have an intelligent conversation. And so part of it is recognizing when you're getting caught up in that spiral. And a lot of it, you can notice it from a physiological standpoint. Your heart will start to race, your hands might get clammy, you'll notice yourself maybe getting warm, like your body will tell you what's going on. And that would be the signal, you know what, I'm not going to be able to have a meaningful conversation right now. I need to step away and come back to this.
Yeah, and all you really have to do is just getting curious. Basically, quiets the amygdala down and turns the prefrontal cortex on. It basically you hit one switch goes off, and the other switch turns on.
So let me ask this question. I think it's a really good question that would probably be relevant to some other people too. I'll send it over to you to start. What is your advice for being attacked in a meeting in front of colleagues? How should you react or respond?
So there would be, we're gonna talk about unkindness in a little bit, but the first thing you do is you try to function what I call it the one idiot per room policy. I have a policy that when somebody's being an idiot, we don't need two idiots in the room. So as much as that fight or flight part of your brain is basically saying kill them now and kill them good, what you want to be able to do is just to sit there and just be quiet. Now, if they won't be quiet, you may need to draw a boundary, which is like, this is something that we can talk about, but we need to talk about it later. One of the rules in dealing with people is public praise and private correction. No one needs to be criticized. Criticize is about the person. It tells them something you don't want. And correction is basically talking about behavior, what you'd like in its place, and the offer for help. So you can basically, if somebody is attacking you, you can at the end of the meeting, what I would do is I would sit down and say, so let me see what I heard you say. What I heard you say is that I'm the most irresponsible person in this place, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Everybody hates me, and I should leave tomorrow. Did I get all that? Now you might be listening, going, "There's no way I'm going to do that." Well, no, that's just part of a larger goal. So did I get that? Yes. Is there more about that? I don't want to know if there's more. Yes, you do, because they're going to communicate it unproductively if they don't tell it to you.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay. So that makes sense. And that doesn't mean it makes sense that you would feel, somebody could feel that. It doesn't mean you feel it. It makes sense. And I can imagine you must be really frustrated. I get all that. They will quiet down immediately because they feel hurt.
Mhm.
They'll immediately is their amygdala will stop, and they will begin to get a little curious about you. Because first of all, you're acting so unusual. They may think there was some kind of a Zen monk or something, but I mean, they're like around you and they'll hear it. And then it's like, so is it okay if I respond to that? Okay, so this is how I see it. And so I'd like to talk about a way that'll work for both of us that we can get past it. But one of the things that's going to be really important is if you have an issue with me, I need you to tell me. Now, again, going back to the need, I need you to talk to me about that when we're alone.
Mhm.
And in that way, because we do work together and we do need to be around each other.
Yeah.
But it was, and the other thing you do is make a general statement. When people talk to me that way, not just them, when people talk to me that way, that just doesn't work well with me. But you're not, you're not in violation of the 188 per room policy that way. You're basically, letting them be the fool, and you're not joining them.
Yeah, and the question of, there's a question of the word react versus respond. First of all, as much as you can help it, don't react. Your
Right.
your gut reactions and be like, oh, I gotta defend myself. I gotta fight back, right? When someone triggers us, we get defensive. And again, that takes us into that lower brain. And so you're not gonna say in that moment, probably anything intelligent. And if you're among other people, again, there might be, other factors going on that are gonna be influencing your behavior. So that's why you wait to have that response. So you have that conversation. And when you're mirroring somebody like that, right? When you're kind of repeating back to them what I heard you say, what that does is, again, that calms down that brain, because you start to have these mirror neurons firing, because what you're saying back to them, what they said and what they're thinking. And so that helps to also trigger empathy and calm down
Yeah,
reactiveness.
there's nothing quite as gratifying as feeling like somebody got you. Yes, and there's nothing quite as frustrating as that's not what I said, that's not what I meant, that's not what it's a crazy maker.
Mm-hmm.
Because you feel like you're zigging and they're zagging. It can happen with your kids, it can happen with your spouse, it can happen with your coworkers or your employees or your bosses, it can happen anywhere. And when it happens, you feel really disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
When that connection ruptures, when these problems begin to start.
Yeah, exactly. So hope that's helpful. Let's see. I have another one for you, Dad. This is kind of like a little bit different, kind of going in a different direction, but helpful nonetheless. Confidence is a byproduct of options. The more options you have, the more confident you will be. Tell us about
Right. Right. I think of, so I, let me so I think about my sport again. So one of the things I love about Ironman is it's a problem solving day. There's one problem after another, and the more ways I have to skin that cat, the more likely that cat's going to be skinned. So one of the things that I'll say to people when they get stuck is I'll say to them, okay, let's make a list of all the things you could do, including things that you won't do. I'm really frustrated with my boss. You could quit your job. I'm not going to quit my job. Yeah, but you could. You're not going to for good reasons. You could decide I'm never going to work. I can decide I'm never going to work again. I'll lose I know, but you could. You're not going to. And what happens is the longer the list is, the more your confidence will grow. And what will begin to happen is you'll say, oh, I'm actually choosing not to do that. I could do that, but I'm choosing to do something else. It's a choice. And what that choice does is that choice takes you out of the victim role.
that.
Because in the victim role, everything is TOO. It's too big. It's too much. It takes too long. It costs too much. That's what it's going to be. So what that option does is it begins to give you different kind of roadmaps, and particularly what's been going on when people have been so much at home, and I've had and. I don't know. Let me know if you've had the same kind of conversations, Rachel, where people have been like, I just feel like it's just so much to do and I just don't know how to get started. And I'll say to people, just set a little tiny goal, just a little goal. I mean, there are plenty of times in a race where, this is a long day. It can be up to 17 hours. And there are plenty of times, particularly when I get to the run, where my body is like, it's just shutting down. And then I'll basically have the goal. I can remember just real fast. I can remember, in 2008, we ended up calling that race the 140-mile swim because it rained 5.5 inches in 13 hours. It was the most miserable day of my life. And with about an hour and a half to go, I was pretty much toast. I was gone. And I had to come up with a plan. I had to come up with a plan. And what happened was I had, it's amazing how the help just kind of comes when you need it. And it's also amazing how when you need options, if you're paying attention and if you're alert, the clues will come. And here's what happened. So people put signs out on the course. And one of the signs said, don't make a decision today, you'll regret on Monday. The race is always held on a Sunday, meaning no matter how tired you are, when you get rested tomorrow, you're going to be thinking different than you're thinking now. The famous coach of the Green Bay Packers, Vince Lombardi, once said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And so I saw that sign. And then another thing that happened is my coach, I had tendonitis for 6 weeks before the race, but that's okay because I was 58, really didn't need to train all that much anyway. Got to take like 6 weeks off. And I said to her, do you think I can finish? And all she said is, if you want to finish, you will. Sometimes just a simple plan, not a lot of words, not a lot of verbiage. And then the last thing that happened was we'd gone to a church service the night before, and the priest was also an Ironman, and he said, some good things are going to happen to you tomorrow, but they're not going to last. I thought, well, that's inspirational. Thank you very much. I'll carry that with me. And he said, but some bad things are going to happen. They're not going to last either. And oftentimes when you look at options and an option isn't working, just knowing that that might be temporary is really helpful. And then when I did it again with a very small plan, I said, there were 2 people in front of me, and I said, just go get them. I started moving. Long story short, I ended up passing about 35 people. I finished with about 14 minutes to spare, but I finished. And that is always one of my most favorite races because it required digging so deep. And when you go into a place inside of yourself where you're solving problems, yes, the iron fryer, Mike, when you're solving problems, then what happens is that there is a kind of mental resiliency. I know word you love a lot, Rachel, and a mental toughness that you can then access whenever you own that now. You can access that. So when you go in a situation, you can become a problem-solving machine by just looking what is doable, what is possible, not what's not working. If you're having a hard day, just pick a small goal. Right. I want to get through that book. Read a page. I don't feel like I exercise. Go out and take a walk.
Yeah.
Eat the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, I think confidence is not only the byproduct of options. It's the byproduct. It also is the byproduct of action. So action builds confidence, and so part of it is like part of what causes us to have a drop in our confidence is that we're just staying. We're not doing anything. We're not making any forward motion, and so part of that can be one of the things I started to do at the start of coronavirus was track bright spots in a journal. So every day I would think through, all right, what was like one little thing, one good thing that happened, one small win, one moment of progress that I could track from today. And so I decided to make a list of 10 things because your brain will expand to fill the space you give it. So if I tell my brain, all right, there's going to be 10 things, or maybe it's 5 things, maybe it's 3 things that, I'm really focusing on, like for the day, then that puts my attention to be more attuned to notice when those things happen. And there's a benefit to doing that. There's a book called The Progress Principle. And in that book, they basically say that the most important factor that contributes to motivation engagement during the workday is making progress and meaningful work. And so just any single morsel of progress, especially right now when people are feeling defeated by everything, like, fortunately the school year's winding down, or has, today's my husband's last day. But it's like, I can't be a teacher or a good enough parent, or I can't be a good enough employee, and I can't do this all and still be a good enough partner, and then forget my friendships, or gosh, I'll let my body go. We just start getting on ourselves about that. And it's really helpful to just take a pause and say, all right, what's like a little win from today? What was a little bright spot? What is, even from the week, what is like one thing I accomplished this week? Just by focusing on what we have done, we start to give ourselves that confidence to know that we can make progress, that we can move forward, even when things are difficult. And so that is the type of thing that can help us like continue as we face, other storms that were, not called for or planned in our lives. Because we look back, hey, remember when you were going through that thing and then you did those like 3 things and you got out of that, you're still not stuck in that anymore. That can be, there's an activity I encourage people to do. It's called one door closes, one door opens. And so you think about a time in your life where you had a negative situation led to an unexpected positive outcome. And you write about it. Just like set a timer for 5-10 minutes and write about it. And say, what was the negative thing that happened? Oh, I got hit by a car. That was really negative. Nobody wants to get hit by a car. I'm in a race with 5 inches of rain. Unexpected negative experience. But then the positive outcome on the other side of that, again, it's the story we tell ourselves around that. So the story is like, yeah, this sucks. I wish I never got hit by a car. But how now I can use this about speaking to people about how to get back up after you feel like you've been knocked down, or, I speak about resilience. So it's like, well, it's pretty appropriate, and for you, Dad, like that story you just told about, going through that difficult race and how the weather was potentially like an impediment, but you probably learned more from that race than any other race that you did.
Right. And the other thing is that people will often ask me, how do you feel when you're racing? And I'm like, well, I'm not really feeling a lot. I'm kind of just, I am where I am, just kind of being in that moment. I'm just having that experience, and I'm just basically dealing with that experience. I like the book you mentioned. One of the things that I'm reading right now is Jim Quick's Limitless, which is just, it's an unbelievable story about expanding possibilities and the way your brain works. I highly recommend it. It came out just recently, but Jim Quick, he's a real mental athlete. So it's a real read.
Awesome. Well, maybe we'll go to that last question. Then I have an audience question that maybe we can,
Okay.
Actually, let's do the audience question. Then we'll do that final number 6. Yeah. We'll close on that. So the audience question is from Brian Goldman. So, great seeing us together from our 7,000 or so dinners together. Yeah, seriously. He said, how do you all thread the needle around how much to guide and coach your children versus inspiring them to find their own path and North Star without doing it for them? So
great question. So part of it is age appropriate. So as your children age, particularly as they become adults, there's a couple of things that I think are important to remember. Number one, they are your children because you're their parents. So you're always going to be their child. But what's really important is that I strongly recommend advice with permission only. So I have a suggestion. Is that okay? And if they say, well, no, I'm good. It's like, okay. I mean, first of all, I look at this a couple ways. First of all, the world was fine before I got here. It's going to be okay after I leave. I'm not answer man. And so part of it has to do with the age of the child. But if it's a younger child, part of what children don't understand is oftentimes, and they don't really appreciate because they may not be cognitively developed enough to really understand that, is there's a reason behind what you do. And maybe the reason doesn't make sense. But sometimes it's so if they're a little teeny tiny one, so no, you can't touch that stove because it would burn you. I was like, no, and I remember once with Zach, with your brother. I mean, he was getting ready to go out with somebody, and I said, I'm really not comfortable, and I'm afraid that something's going to happen to you, so I don't want you to do that. But I think he was a teenager, but it was like, look, this is what I don't want you to do, and this is why. There's a reason behind it, and oftentimes there's a couple of things that we can let our children know when we're frightened. We can let our children know when we're worried. We can let them know when we don't understand sometimes something, and just that kind of humanness with them will help them. Maybe not at the moment, but will help them model that later. Yeah. So
I mean, I think the biggest thing is to make sure to check yourself and be mindful of, am I trying to live vicariously through my children and do something that I didn't get to do?
Right.
Or am I trying to relive a glory day that I had? And so I want them to have the same goals and dreams as I do, which that's where I think it can be dangerous. Because I mean, there's this really incredible, if you get to watch it, oh gosh, it's a 30 for 30 on ESPN, and I can send it out in a follow-up, but there was a football player whose dad, like he played at USC. Somebody might know the name. They can type it in the chat if you know who it is. Tony something, I think his name was. But he was like basically groomed to be an incredible football player. And he was, I mean, he absolutely from every potential angle of fitness, he like excelled, and they called him like the robot. And, he got into the NFL and he ended up kind of being a mess. I mean, he got connected to drugs and, everything started to spiral. He eventually like really lost his career. And what he came to realize is that like, he didn't really like, he wasn't passionate about being like a football star. And so he was using all of these other mechanisms, like using drugs and acting out, as a way to get out of the thing that he thought he was supposed to do. And it turns out what he loved to do more than anything was art. And so he's an artist. He doesn't play football anymore, and he's an artist. Yes, thank you. Todd Marinovich. Thank you. Right. That is his name, Todd. Thank you, Brian. If you haven't seen that, Todd Marinovich, it's in the chat. It's at ESPN 30 for 30. Really phenomenal if you're a parent to watch that and to really think about, am I doing anything like this? Again, perhaps well-intentioned, but am I perhaps steering my kid in a direction that they may not want to go? And so I think it's important to let your kids try different things. I mean, I tried the flute in third grade, right? And I think I lasted a month. I didn't like reading music, and I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And my parents were like, okay, you don't have to play the flute anymore. And then, I tried guitar in high school, and I got a keyboard for an 8th grade graduation gift. And I realized all along that what I loved the most was singing. I didn't want an instrument. I had my own instrument internally. And so thank goodness they didn't like force me to do any of that stuff, because I ultimately got to where I was supposed to be anyway, using the gift that was most natural and most, joyful for me to use. So I would just say, be mindful of that. And both of us, my dad talks about this, having very interest-driven work, is that if your kids are really passionate about something and it's so like far off from what you're interested in or you think they should be doing, at least have the curiosity and approach them with that, and get to maybe research it a little bit yourself, or say, hi, I'd like to learn more about that. Or show me what you've, is there something you've created or something you've done or something you've watched, like that they would feel affirmed, because kids just want to feel accepted. All people want to feel accepted. And so kids really want to feel accepted by their parents. And so if there's a way that you can at least show some curiosity about what they're interested in and show some enthusiasm for it, I think those things can be helpful. So I hope that.
Right. Yeah. And I think sort of to wind that part up and kind of closing out here, I think it's important to remember that it's with your children, it's their trip around the block. It's just not, they're not taking your lap. They are themselves. They are them. And I think the other thing that is just, I think it's so important is just to, we're oftentimes so generous with our negative moods and negative thoughts, and we're oftentimes stingy with the other ones. And I think we need to flip that on its head. And I think it's so important that when you're proud of your children, that you say that to them, that you tell them how proud you are of them. I just think because you're actually you made them. You're like the sculptor and they're the clay. And when the sculptor says to the clay, I just think you're terrific, I mean, doesn't get much better than that. And you'll hear people tell stories sometimes of having wished they got that. So don't hold that back. Be generous with that. I mean, you don't have to throw a parade every time they do something, but it's basically say, I really, or you just ask them, how are you feeling about that? Or what do you need, to differentiate yourself from them. Yeah.
And I think we'll close out just again, because it's about Father's Day. I think this is a good place to close the conversation. Obviously, we're going to have another conversation. So let us know in the chat if you're like, yes, we want to have another one of these. But I think along, those lines, I think one of the reasons that I was able to be so resilient, and the reason I was able to kind of bounce back from those, rejection and other difficult things I went through as a kid, is because I knew my parents were in my corner. And my parents were very, they would listen to me when I was having a hard time, when I was sad, when I felt hurt. They validated how I felt, that like, gosh, that would be really hurtful if that happened. And I said, yes. And so how they loved me, how they have continued to love me, I'd say has been a really significant factor in the confidence that I have in myself, the confidence I have in my ability to succeed, the confidence I have in my ability to handle challenges that come my way, the confidence I have in my ability to make an impact in the world, and to believe that I am worthy of being seen, heard, loved, and accepted. I think a lot of that is really if you're a parent, of what you're modeling. And you don't have to be perfect. My parents had a really rough patch in their marriage when I was younger and really struggled. But, I saw that redemptive work and restorative work that they did, and I learned from that. So you don't have to be a perfect parent, but do your best to be a loving and accepting parent, I would say. Yeah.
And with that, thank you. I would say that I hit the daughter lottery here, and I'm grateful for you, honey.
Yeah, I hit the dad lottery too. And happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Make sure you reach out, even if it's not your own dad, to somebody maybe who's been a father figure to you, and let them know the significance they have in your life. Let them know how much you appreciate and value them, because we don't do that nearly enough. And It's always worth doing, always worth reaching out and expressing appreciation and gratitude to the people in our lives who are important to us. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Happy Father's Day. Thank you
Happy
all.
Father's Day.
Oh, you dad. See you on Sunday, Rachel.